Hi everyone, my name is Karen Brewster and I am a Master Gardener with the Penn State Extension Center County Master Gardeners. And today we are going to be talking about container gardening. Spring is really a good time to begin planning for your container gardens. And as you begin to plan, there are three things to keep in mind as you put together your container garden. Those three items are to allow room in your container for your plants to grow, so you don't want to overcrowd the planter. You want to use the right soil, and you want to ensure that you allow for adequate drainage in the container that you're using. Choosing the right soil is very important, and you should really know the difference between the various soils that you'll see in the stores. The first is topsoil, the second is garden soil, and then the third type that is very popular is the potting mix. And the potting mix is the variety of soil that you want to use for your container garden. Once you've chosen the right soil, you want to ensure that all of your containers that you plant in have adequate drainage, and you can do that by making sure that there are holes in the bottom of the container that you're planting. If you have a larger pot, you can also use a layer of gravel to assist with the drainage in the larger pots. And lastly, you want to avoid putting saucers under containers that sit outside. The saucers often retain water, and that can lead to the roots of your plants rotting. So again, you want to avoid the saucers underneath the planters. When you begin placing plants in the planter, there are three elements of design to keep in mind, and the three elements rhyme: thrill, fill, and spill. The thrill element is the tall plant or the focal point of the container, and you can see in this slide that Uh, the person planting this container has used a tall grass as the focal point. The second design element is the fill element, and that is plants that you use to fill between the thrill and the spill element. So they are usually planted at the base of the taller plants. And then the third element is the spill element. And those are the plants that drape over the edge, drawing the eye down and framing the container garden. Fertilizing your plants is also important to ensure that they bloom throughout the growing season. And many of the bagged potting mixes already have fertilizer mixed in them. It's very important that you read the packaging to ensure that you aren't over fertilizing. You always want to follow manufacturer's instructions when using fertilizers. And if you're not sure whether or not your potting mix already has fertilizer mixed in, you can always add a bit of compost in with your potting soil, and that will ensure that your plants have the nutrients that they need. We talked earlier about not overcrowding your plants. And a good general rule for avoiding overcrowding is to allow twice the width and height of the root ball for growth. So for example, if you have a 4-inch dirt ball or plug on the plant, you should put it in a pot that's no smaller than an 8-inch pot. And again, that will simply allow adequate room for the plant to grow. Sometimes the larger planters get very heavy, and to help avoid that, you can take a large planter and fill it with empty water bottles, and then put a smaller container that contains the plant on top. That will help lighten the plant. One thing you do not want to use in the bottom of your planter are the foam plastic packing peanuts. Watering your container garden is going to be very important. Overwatering is also something that's very important. So in addition to the proper drainage for your container, you can also fill an empty water bottle with, with water. You punch some holes in the sides of the bottle. You can then bury that bottle in your container garden and it will slowly release the water into the plant without causing it to be too wet. When you get to the part of putting flowers and color into your container garden, annuals are always a very nice way to add that punch of color to your planters. Perennials are also a nice choice for container gardens. Hostas do especially well in container gardens. Again, if you use perennials, the nice thing about them is that when you're finished with using them in your container garden, you can place them somewhere else in your garden for the winter season and enjoy them in the spring again, or you can again place them in the container garden for your next season. You can also use junipers and evergreens in container gardens. If you choose to do that, it's important to be sure that you get a variety of juniper or evergreen that is slow growing. And if you include junipers and evergreens in a winter container garden, you want to be sure that they are protected from the wind. Fruits and vegetables can also be planted in container gardens and often do quite well. I know that I have planted tomatoes in a container garden and they do very well every summer. You can also get creative with your container gardens, and you'll see on this slide that the individual has made a pyramid and they've put a clematis vine on this particular pyramid. You can also grow vegetables on these pyramids as well. Once you have your container garden planted, you can often put mulch on top of it to add to the design element of the planter, but the mulch also helps with moisture retention. So you'll see in this particular slide, someone has actually also used seashells to put as a cover over the soil. There are lots of varieties of soil covers. I've seen in some magazines and some planters where they've actually put acorns in for fall container gardens. So again, you can be very creative with the coverings that you use on your planters. Another nice design element for container gardening is grouping. You'll see in this slide where they have used 3 different containers of yellow pansies to make a really nice presentation for a spring container garden. And believe it or not, container gardens can attract bees and butterflies if you use the appropriate kinds of flowers that attract butterflies and bees. This is a very fun project if you have small children, to teach them about pollination and for them to actually see up close the butterflies and the bees visiting your container garden. Container gardening can really last through the entire growing season, starting with spring. If you plant cool weather plants in the spring in a container garden, such as pansies or ornamental kale, they'll do quite well. And it's important to not plant the spring container garden too early. Wait until the evening temperatures are usually in the mid-50s to ensure that your plants do well in a spring container garden. From spring, we then move into summer, and you can amend that container garden, changing out your cool season annuals for some colorful summer flowers. And again, as you head into summer, keeping your plants moist with water is very important. Maintaining that your annuals bloom, you often want to pinch out the expired blooms. From summer, we then transition into fall, and you can see from these slides some creative ways to do a lovely fall container garden. Mums and ornamental kale are two very popular kinds of flowers that can be put into container gardens. And you'll see in this one slide where someone has carved out a pumpkin and used that as the container. So again, you can be really creative in the kinds of container gardens that you create. Moving from fall then on to winter, your container garden could be filled with red twigs. I've used thistle, I've used evergreen and winterberry. They all make very pretty winter container gardens that add some color throughout the winter months. When you're finished with your planting for the growing season, it's important to empty your pots and clean them with a diluted bleach solution. Also with your clay pots, you don't want to stack them. You want to just kind of line them in a row in your garden or in a garage or patio. The terracotta clay sometimes expands and it will make your pots crack. So storing them in the way that this slide shows is really the best way to store your clay pots for the winter. Most importantly, as you plant your container gardens, you want to be creative and have fun. You'll see in this one slide they have used a teapot and planted it with a red geranium. When you do that kind of planting, you want to again remember that you have drainage holes in the bottom of the teapot, or that the planter that the geranium is in has drainage holes. Porch boxes are another fun way to do container gardening. And you'll see here they used a lot of green foliage plants in this container garden, and that's very pretty as well. And there's another slide here that shows that someone has used a bird bath as a feeder or as a container garden to plant some annuals and coleus. It looks very pretty. So again, the level of creativity is simply endless when you begin to container garden. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. If you have questions about this presentation or questions about becoming a master garden, please go to extension.psu.edu.